Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Health Animated. On this podcast, we strive to make health information accessible to everyone. My name is Alex.
And I'm Danielle. If you're returning to our podcast, thanks for your ongoing support. And if you're listening for the first time, welcome. We hope you stick around.
So in our last episode, we did a deep dive on an article that looked at various sleep hygiene factors and also other interventions that would help improve sleep. So this episode, as promised, we're going to take a look at melatonin, which in Canada is an over-the-counter supplement, and it's been widely used to help promote better sleep. As we emphasized already, sleep is just so critical for our body. We need sleep for a variety of reasons. And one hormone that we naturally produce in our brain is called melatonin. And this hormone really helps with the timing of our circadian rhythm, which again is our 24-hour internal clock. And when we are exposed to light during the night, that can actually block melatonin production. So with that being said, in addition to our body's natural ability to produce melatonin, you can actually purchase melatonin off the shelf.
A lot of you might be asking yourself, why buy melatonin when your body makes it for free? Well, melatonin sales last year reflect that many people are buying melatonin. So, Alex, what was that stat? How many millions of dollars were spent on melatonin last year?
So, according to last year's sales number in 2020, American consumers spent over $800 million on melatonin supplements, and this represents a 42% year-over-year increase. Isn't that wild?
Yeah, that's pretty mind-blowing. $800 million.
I think for me, what's more shocking is just the year-over-year increase. 40% is a huge increase, and, I'm not much of a betting person, but if I were to bet, I'm sure it has something to do with the pandemic affecting their sleep as well, so...
Yeah, I think you're right there. With 2020 being $800 million, it's mind-blowing. And I think you're right about the pandemic definitely playing a part there. Anyway, just given the sheer magnitude of how much money is going into melatonin, we wanted to spend this episode looking at the burning questions that come up about melatonin. So, Alex, where did we go to figure out these burning questions?
Well, we typed in the word melatonin into Google, and autocomplete suggested the most common searches around melatonin. So we're very curious to unpack the most common questions that's been typed into Google, so let's jump right in. So, shall we start with our first question?
Yeah, let's start it.
Okay, first question. This is probably very predictable, but what is melatonin?
So before I even start talking about melatonin, I want to take you guys back to the circadian rhythm concepts that we kind of touched on in our last episode. So the circadian rhythm, you can think of it as your body's natural internal clock. So the circadian rhythm kind of dictates our sleep-wake cycle, and it also is driven by light and dark input. So melatonin is a hormone that our brain produces in the pineal gland in response to darkness. So our circadian rhythm controls everything from the time that we go to sleep to the time that we wake up in the morning. And the area of our brain that drives the circadian rhythm is called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. So when our eyes receive light input, they direct this light input to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which then links up to this gland called the pineal gland, which then will stop the production of melatonin. So melatonin is that hormone that makes us sleepy, and it's secreted in the dark or in the absence of light when our pineal gland is not getting that light stimulus. And as we kind of touched on earlier, in our previous episode, in this world, we're just constantly getting inundated with light stimulus, right? So that kind of complicates matters a little bit. So that's our body's natural mechanism of producing melatonin. So when we talk about melatonin supplements, we're talking about synthetic melatonin typically. So melatonin that is made in a lab that people can take over the counter by going to their local pharmacy.
So like humans, all vertebrates with a backbone, such as birds, fish, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, also produce melatonin through their pineal gland. And what was really cool is we discovered that plants, bacteria, unicellular organisms can also produce melatonin. So it's something that seems to be quite universal across many, many species. What's fascinating as well is our levels of melatonin varies depending on the time of the year. So in the summer, we tend to produce less melatonin compared to winter, in which we produce a little bit more. And this kind of makes sense because if you think about melatonin's relationship to the presence/absence of light, in the summer we get more light exposure, so therefore we have less melatonin production. That's sort of the rationale behind it. In addition to that, though, age can also play a factor in the amount of melatonin we have in our body. So apparently kids actually have more melatonin, and as we age, that level tends to decrease. So now that we've warmed up with our first question, let's move on to our second question. So second question is, how does melatonin affect the brain?
So I will say that melatonin is very readily absorbed. So when you take melatonin supplements by mouth or under the tongue, it's readily absorbed within the body, and it actually crosses into what's called the blood-brain barrier. So it crosses into our central nervous system, into the brain, where it will have its effect. So what does the melatonin that makes it to the site of action, our brain, actually do? Well, the studies have found that it doesn't actually appear to impact our REM sleep, which is actually good because a lot of sleeping aids can actually negatively impact our REM sleep, which is not good. So melatonin does not have an impact on REM sleep, and studies have shown that it can decrease the time that it takes to fall asleep. So I want to let that kind of sit for a moment, and I want you to think about if someone told you that a drug is going to reduce the amount of time it takes for you to fall asleep, what would that number have to be in order for you to take that medication?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think for me, anywhere between 15 minutes to 30 minutes would be my benchmark. What about you?
I think it's hard to say because some nights I will take a really long time before I fall asleep, but that's not like every night. So I think for me, I would say maybe like reducing it by 20 to 30 minutes would be kind of nice.
Okay. So kind of the same.
Yeah, I was going to say an hour, but like it doesn't always take an hour for me to fall asleep. So you'll be maybe surprised to learn that melatonin does demonstrate effectiveness in reducing the time it takes to sleep by a whole 7.06 minutes. And that ranged between about 4.3 minutes to 9.7 minutes. So probably not kind of the expected benefit that we would have maybe wanted to see.
I think everyone has a different threshold in terms of how effective they want a drug to be before they're willing to take it. So for some people, 7 minutes could be quite significant. And for others, they might look at it and be like, it's just 7 minutes. This number did actually come from a 2013 meta-analysis of 19 different studies of individuals who have primary sleep disorder. And so in total, they looked at close to 1,700 participants. So just to take a step back, like what is a meta-analysis? So basically a meta-analysis takes a look at all the randomized control trials that are available that had the same question. So is melatonin effective for sleep? And they combine them all and try to see if overall there was a benefit or not. So that's where the 7 minutes came from. So it's a very systematic approach in consolidating the evidence across these trials. The other big question that most sleep studies try to answer is, does it increase the duration of total sleep time?
What's your ideal sleep time duration extender, Alex?
I guess if I were to pick a number, I would say probably an hour is probably what I would expect.
Well, I was just thinking, like, how do you even get an extra hour of sleep? Because like during the the work week, unless you're like going to sleep earlier, because then you're just like sleeping through your alarm clock and like not making it to work. So according to that same meta-analysis that Alex talked about earlier, that was done in 2013, the average increased sleep time for melatonin was 8.25 minutes. Once again, that was the average. So that ranged from 1.7 minutes to almost 15 minutes to 14.7 minutes. quite a bit of a range. I guess if you look at how much that spans, we might be closer to what I was desiring, which was that extra 20 to 30 minutes. But, in the grand scheme of things, I'm going to say I wasn't that impressed with this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the results are not as exciting as we would hope for. But again, it depends on your own personal threshold of what is considered beneficial. So we'll leave it up to you guys to kind of draw those conclusions. Having said that, though, if we were to look at the guidelines to see what they would suggest, most guidelines actually lean towards saying things like melatonin is only minimally beneficial, or it has insufficient evidence for us to recommend it widely. That is sort of the tone that most guidelines are taking with respect to melatonin as a supplement.
Yeah. So, Alex, there was one area that melatonin is shown to be actually remarkably effective. And I'm wondering if you can elaborate on this, because it was an area that you researched.
This was I think one of the first times where I read something where it said a drug was remarkably effective. And that's a direct quote. So melatonin is actually remarkably effective in preventing or reducing jet lag, which is something that should not concern any of us during this time because no one is flying in a plane for the most part. However, once we return back to normal, it should be reassuring for you to know that if you want to fight jet lag, you could actually take melatonin. And I mean, everybody knows about jet lag, but essentially, if we're trying to bring it back to our internal circadian rhythm. Jet lag results when our circadian rhythm is being thrown out of sync with the time zone of our destination. So melatonin can actually be used to help us sort of realign that difference between our internal clock and the outside clock. And they found that if you use it occasionally for short term, it is considered to be safe. And in general, they recommend using it if you are going to be traveling across multiple time zones. So specifically, it has quite a bit of evidence if you have to cross 5 or more time zones. So in terms of the flying direction, it's actually even more beneficial if it's being used in a situation where you're flying in an easterly direction. So that's an interesting thing to note.
If we're flying easterly, it'll help us even more. So yeah, for that next trip over to Europe.
So the next question on our Google search is, does melatonin help with anxiety? Ooh.
It hasn't been, shown to be effective for general anxiety or for anxiety disorders, but it can help with pre and post-op. So that was pretty interesting for me and definitely not the answer that I expected to find.
You know that recently I got all my wisdom teeth pulled.
Yeah.
So had I known about this fact earlier, I could have tried melatonin.
Oh my gosh, I would have needed it for if I was getting all my wisdom teeth taken out. Our next question is, why is melatonin taken under the tongue? Alex, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, for sure. So let's take a step back for a moment. So there are multiple dosage forms available for melatonin. The most common ones that we're familiar with are the ones that you take by mouth, where you swallow the pill. There's some that you place under your tongue and you let it dissolve. So with this question, I think they're probably talking about the sublingual version of the medication, which is basically meaning that you place it under your tongue. So the reason why some drugs are designed to be taken like that is because there's actually capillaries or blood vessels that are located under our tongue. And if the drug can be absorbed directly into your bloodstream, it will get into your bloodstream and into your overall system much quicker than if you were to, say, swallow a pill. So essentially, putting it under your tongue helps you to bypass a lot of those barriers or things that our body does to break down the drug. So what that means is you have a little bit more control and predictability when it comes to taking tablets under the tongue versus, the conventional way of taking pills, which is usually swallowing it. So speaking of a number of different dosage forms, this question was kind of surprising to me. So the next Googled question is, what is a melatonin pen?
What is a melatonin pen indeed? I had no clue what a melatonin pen was before I Googled this. And I will say that I was not able to find any like scientific literature on a melatonin pen, but I did find an article from a very reliable Rolling Stone magazine. Melatonin pen is essentially a vape form of melatonin. So I think let's just all kind of let that ruminate for a moment. Does this logically sound like a good idea? No, right? So essentially a melatonin pen is a vape pen that delivers melatonin to the lungs. So this is not advisable. This has not been studied in any kind of clinical setting from an efficacy and safety standpoint. But what we do know about vaping is that it's not good for you, right? So we found this off the CDC. So this is data from last year, so from February 2020. And they found that a total of about like 2,800 people were hospitalized with e-cigarette or vaping product use associated lung injury. And those hospitalizations, it was either hospitalizations or deaths. And those were reported, this is American data from the CDC, and that was reported from all 50 states. Yeah, and there was actually 68 deaths that were confirmed in 29 states, which is pretty shocking. So vaping is not good for you. So we wouldn't recommend it, and we would not recommend vaping melatonin. That is a bad idea. It's not been studied via that route. It's not good. So just please we do not endorse this route. I was pretty shocked to learn what a melatonin pen was. And like, I have so many questions about that, you know. That being said, Alex, can we talk about how does melatonin make you feel?
Well, it should make you feel sleepy because that's what it's indicated for people who have trouble sleeping. So yeah, I mean, I don't know how else to answer it, but you should start to feel drowsy. And usually most people do take it about 30 minutes to an hour before sleeping. But again, just double check the product label and follow what's recommended on the product. Mm-hmm. Okay, that was a quick and easy one. So next question is melatonin bad for you?
What are the side effects of melatonin? So that's how I'm going to answer this. So I don't want to get too listy on you. So we can just kind of think of things a little bit more head to toe. So if we look at it from your head, you'll experience that drowsy feeling. You might get a headache. You might feel dizzy, and you might feel irritable. From your stomach, you might notice some cramping and some nausea. Overall, the use of melatonin is termed to be pretty safe for short-term use. However, we just don't have a lot of data on the long-term use of melatonin. So if you're using this for more than a week, it's very important that you talk to your doctor or your pharmacist and let them know and find out if it's okay for you. So melatonin can interact with other medications that you're taking. So it's very important that if you're taking any medications at all, that you talk to your doctor or your pharmacist. And that includes even if you drink alcohol and take melatonin, because alcohol is also a drug. So do talk to your doctor, talk to your pharmacist about the effects of other medications that you're taking with melatonin.
Very well said.
Thank you. So our next question is, does melatonin make you gain weight?
So there's actually no evidence to suggest that taking melatonin will cause weight gain. And that's us sort of digging into the primary literature and randomized control trials. And like from everything that we looked at, it wasn't even listed as a side effect. So
yeah, although I feel like the studies that we looked at were more shorter term studies. So maybe there's not enough long-term studies to really dig into it.
That's a good point. It's hard to gain weight in like just a month, but
yeah. Well, unless it's COVID.
Those COVID pounds.
Yeah. Those skip the dishes pounds.
Yeah. Okay, well, the next question is, does melatonin make you feel groggy the next day?
Good question. So we found that there is no impact of melatonin on alertness or mood the following day.
Mm-hmm.
So the next question I thought was really interesting and good. Is melatonin addictive? So I think it's an interesting question because I think people, when they write it, they recognize that a lot of sleep aids can be habit forming. So I think that's why it's a very insightful question and something important to ask anytime you're having a conversation about sleep aids. So Alex, what's the verdict on this?
So what we found is that there's no evidence to suggest that melatonin is addictive. So I think it's pretty safe to say that melatonin doesn't cause dependence, and there's no reports to indicate any level of tolerance, dependence, or even what we call the hangover effect.
Yeah, I thought that was very interesting. Okay, so our last question was really interesting. So, and I think that if you asked it about anything, you would get some really interesting Google search results. So the next question is, why is melatonin controversial? So, right, like if you typed in, why is anything controversial? Like you could get some pretty good hits. Like, why is Alex controversial? Or like, why is Danielle controversial? So, Alex, do you want to walk us through why is melatonin controversial?
Okay, we're gonna have to tag team this, but when I saw the question, I'm like, huh? What do you mean melatonin is controversial? It's like the most boring drug ever. Like, it barely has any significant side effects. It's kind of like, well, what is interesting about it, right? So I guess if I were to break it down, the first angle I'll try to take it from is sort of like the research, clinical trial side of things. So what we recognize is that most of the trials only studied melatonin for a short period of time. Like even though you have the results, it's important to kind of consider those limitations and drawbacks with the study design.
Okay, so the next thing that I want to add that's kind of off script is I personally think it's controversial that we have something that has, you know, a relatively small effect and like limited evidence. However, we've spent over $800 million in like a year on this drug. Like that to me is controversial, right? Like $800 million for 7 minutes of sleep improvement for latency and 8 minutes of improvement for duration on average. So I think that is pretty controversial to me.
Totally. It's like one of those things where it makes you think about the way we regulate these products and how it ends up making it to the shelf of pharmacies and other like stores. I mean, it just goes to show that not everything you see on the shelf is going to be effective.
You know what? You bring up a really good point. And I think that we should kind of just take you guys into a little bit of background that we probably should have done earlier, but it's about the natural health products and how they're regulated within Canada. In Canada, we will find a number of natural health products on the shelf. And the ones that have been regulated by Health Canada have something called a natural product number. So that's called an NPN. So that is kind of the natural product equivalent of a drug identification number. It's an NPN. So essentially, natural health products are not held to the same rigor as drugs from a regulatory perspective, from both a safety standpoint and an effectiveness standpoint. So if something has a natural product number, at most, I think we can be assured that what is on the label is in the bottle. And that is fully what I believed before the next study that we're going to walk you through, because that is what I learned in school. And now Alex is about to blow your mind.
I don't even know where to go with this, but I'm just going to put it out there. And it's not meant to be controversial, but then again, maybe that's why we got this question initially. Products that you find on the shelf may not actually contain what's listed on the label. So just let that marinate with you for a moment. And I'm referring specifically to melatonin supplements because in a 2017 study that was conducted right here in Canada, a group of researchers tested 31 different melatonin supplements, which were purchased from grocery stores and pharmacies. And for most of these supplements, they found that the melatonin in the product didn't even match what was listed on the product label. So for example, if the bottle says 5 milligrams of melatonin, you would expect there to be 5 milligrams of melatonin, right? That just makes sense. However, when they measured the content in the lab, they found that the melatonin ranged from anywhere from negative 83% of the total claimed drug to upwards of 478% of the labeled content. So to kind of put into a bit of context, let's go back to the product saying that it's 5 milligrams of melatonin. So if it says it has 5 milligrams of melatonin, based on this study, you could actually get something varying from as low as 1 milligram all the way up to 25 milligrams. That is shocking.
Yeah, that is mind-blowing. So we were just so shocked that we had to actually email the author and say, did these products have natural product numbers? And ladies and gentlemen, they did. They had natural product numbers. So they were quote unquote regulated by Health Canada. So it was just pretty shocking. And yeah, this study is cited in numerous sources from around the world, like globally.
In addition to failing the test of having, the actual labeled content, they also found that between lot to lot actually varied as well. And that can be as much as 465%. So just because you swear by a specific product and you buy it over and over again, you could actually be exposed to a different amount each time. So that to me is also very mind-blowing.
Yeah. So what does that mean, Alex? Like, are we telling people just like don't go out there and don't like get anything because you don't know what you're gonna get? Like what are we, like, what is our takeaway here?
I mean, we put a lot of faith in our system, right? Like, as you mentioned, in Canada, we have a regulatory process. So we have one for pharmaceutical products, and that's usually recognized through assigning a drug identification number, a DID number, and there's something equivalent for the natural health product side. But like you said, I think the lesson that we should take away from this is from a systems level, I think we should expect a lot more from the Canadian government in just making sure that there's proper standardization for natural health products as well. Because, just because it's a natural health product doesn't imply that it will be safe. It doesn't imply that it'll be effective. So it's really important to hold these products to the same standard as pharmaceutical products. So I don't know. I don't know if I'm being too extreme.
Couldn't agree more. No. So you know what? It's interesting because one of the other questions that we Googled, or that we didn't Google, but that came up when we were doing our Google search, is why is melatonin banned in the UK? So, okay, first off, it's not actually banned in the UK, but it's only available as prescription in the United Kingdom. So until 1995, it was actually sold in health food shops as a nutritional supplement, but now it's actually only available as a prescription medication. So it's interesting because if it's only available as a prescription medication or as a drug, then it could go through the same rigor that other prescription medications have to go through. So I guess hypothetically, if we were to implement the same process in Canada, then it would be held to the same standards that our drugs have to go through, which is to, prove efficacy, safety, and that it's undergoing like pretty stringent manufacturing standards. Canada, the US, it's available over the counter, whereas like the UK, it's prescription only. New Zealand, it's prescription only. Japan, it's prescription only. So I think it's interesting. And I think there's something to be said about the benefit of having it as prescription only, because it really does kind of, in some senses, like force people to have that conversation with their healthcare provider about sleep hygiene, about the effectiveness. But that being said, I think people, particularly in North America, value the autonomy of being able to make their own decisions when it comes to like natural health products and to regulate it to that effect when overall it has been proven to be relatively safe. I think it would be something that probably wouldn't be palatable for a number of people. So I think it's a bit of a tricky balance, right? So I think that if we're all going in eyes wide open about what is the benefit and like what are the risks of melatonin, then I think it is okay to keep it as over the counter. However, I think from a safety standpoint, just from like the fact that you're not getting what's necessarily on the label, I think preferably I would like to see it as an over-the-counter drug with like a drug identification number, because then I just feel like there could be higher quality products out there.
Yeah.
That would be my kind of compromise.
You don't want to make it completely inaccessible to people, but at the same time, you want to hold it to the same standard as pharmaceutical products. So I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah, because overall, I think from a safety perspective, it's actually in some respects safer than some of the other over-the-counter sleep aids that we have on the shelves, right? Like, which contain like diphenhydramine, which is, I think overall, it's actually much safer than some of the over-the-counter drugs, but it's not a drug. Yeah. So it's not really regulated to the same degree. So
yeah. And like, speaking of safety, like, I feel like we would be remiss if we didn't also mention that in that same 2017 study where they analyzed the 31 products, they actually found that 8 of those supplements, so 26%, contained another active ingredient called serotonin. And in Canada, serotonin is actually a regulated ingredient. So it was just shocking to see that there's other active ingredients in addition to melatonin in your product. This whole study just reminds me of a recent drug recall that happened in Canada, where there was a sleep aid that was pulled off the shelf because it actually contained other active ingredients that were not listed on the drug, and those active ingredients were prescription sleep aids.
Wow. Yeah, it was just so mind-blowing to see that one, especially because I think you were saying that your friend was like, oh, this is the best supplement, it's worked so well, but and also it's scary, right, from a safety perspective, because you just don't know what you're getting. And I think at the very least, people deserve to know what they're putting into their bodies. Like, that is just a right.
Wow. So we really unpacked a lot of things about melatonin, and perhaps we even took a bit of a slight tangent, but I feel like these are all such important conversations, and I think we learned a lot from this episode, and we hope that you also found this episode interesting. Now that you know, would you take it?
Would I take it? I would take it for jet lag for sure. And I would take it for pre-operative anxiety.
You're so evidence-based.
But I don't know if I'd take it for sleep. I think personally I would probably go for the sleep hygiene tips that we talked about earlier. And I think I would probably like work through, like a meditation video before I went for the melatonin. Yeah, I thought it was very interesting. And I think one of the takeaways from this episode was just like, all of the interesting things that people Google about melatonin and about other drugs. And I think like the world has some very interesting questions about it. And I think like it was like really fun to go through these.
Yeah, I agree. I also have similar takeaways where, like, I mean, I already knew about the jet lag, so it was just nice to kind of refresh my memory on that. Even though most guidelines don't say that it's like super beneficial for sleep, I feel like I still will take it if I know I have, like, say, an important day the very next day, or I have to like get sleep. So I might resort to that occasionally. But yeah, definitely wouldn't take it long term for sure. Because if you have to take it, if you have to rely on a drug long term, it really should be a sign for you to see a healthcare provider to get proper diagnosis and proper treatment. And also totally agree with implementing all the sleep hygiene tips, because I feel like oftentimes those can get overlooked and overshadowed by, a pill because it's deemed as like a quick fix.
Totally. Yeah, it's interesting because those sleep hygiene measures can actually give you more melatonin that your body makes, and it will do it at no cost to you because your body is just naturally producing this. So if you avoid that screen time, if you like follow those sleep hygiene tips, you do not need to pay for it because you're getting that melatonin for free.
Yay for free melatonin.
Okay, Alex. So did you want to let people know about the fact that we're going to be taking a bit of a break?
Oh no.
I think everyone probably deserves to know.
This sounds like a breakup and
No.
okay, no, well,
Okay, we're not breaking up.
it's not you, it's us. Well, okay, well, all jokes aside, like, I think this is our, I guess, this is like our 10th episode, and I feel like we've been working really hard these past several months, and I think right now we want to maybe perhaps take just a bit of a hiatus, and the reason for that is, well, twofolds. One is we want to make sure we take care of ourselves and our mental health. Let us recharge our batteries a bit before we come back even stronger. And number two is we probably just need a little bit of time just doing some work behind the scenes to come up with new exciting content to share with you guys. And with that being said, even though we might not be releasing a podcast for the next, I think we're going to plan for like a month to be away from podcasting. With that being said, we'll still be active on Instagram, and we'll still find ways to stay connected with you guys because, you know, we're doing it for you guys, and we want to ensure that we're still connected and still staying in touch with you.
Yeah, and that being said, please email us your ideas for new content. We're always interested, and we'd love to hear from you because at the end of the day, we're not doing this for ourselves. We're doing it for you, and we want you guys to enjoy these podcasts. And yeah, let us know what you're interested in learning.
Yeah, and thank you guys so much for tuning into this week's episode of Health Animated. As always, if you enjoy what you hear, please do share this with your friends and family and other people around you.
And it would be really awesome if you could give us a follow on social media, slide into our DMs, check out our YouTube channel, you know, all those social media things. Connect with us because we're here when we're around and we're really interested in what you have to say. So yeah, we will see you guys soon.
Bye for now.